How the world turns, hey? How the world turns. I feel like I have some explaining to do because I've been very clear that I don't want to go into politics. And that is actually the truth. I still don't want to be in politics. As I've said many times before, I want to do something useful with my life. And unfortunately, being in politics tends to be, at least historically in Australia, has been about damage limitation. You're not really doing a lot of good. You're just reducing how much bad is able to be done by others. And that's, I don't know, that's not a particularly thrilling way to live to someone like me. So how did I get from there? And I've knocked back so many different parties and so many different elections that have asked me to run, and I've said no, 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 no. I was offered 4 times. I was asked 4 times this election by multiple different parties. And then finally, all of a sudden, as much to my surprise, I think, as to anybody else's, I said yes. What the hell am I doing? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. This is a slow chat. My name's Topher Field. If you're joining me for the first time, then this format might surprise you a little bit, because this format, this slow chat, came out of me keeping myself sane during all of the lockdowns. I was involved with a lot of the rallies. I was quite public. I was being targeted by police. I was enjoying some significant backlash from the public, blah, 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 blah. And so for the sake of my mental health, I was smoking and enjoying cigars. And I would enjoy them, and they would work wonders for my headspace. And then one day I thought, you know what? Instead of sitting out the back smoking a cigar and thinking, why don't I sit here and have a chat with all of you? And so I started doing that, and then that's evolved. Now I do interviews and all sorts of other stuff. Well, we're going a little bit old school. This is old school slow chat today. This is me, a cigar, some whiskey. I'm going to start with the Glenlivet 12, but I suspect that's going to be a little bit too light for this particular cigar. So I do have some Glenfiddich 12 that I can move to if I decide I need to. And talking to you guys. Now, I've got some explaining to do, like I said, and then going to go through as many of your questions as I can possibly get through without going mad and falling asleep, or without all of you falling asleep. So that's the plan for tonight. I'm going to explain myself, talk a bit about what's going on, and then we are going to have a chat, answer questions. There's no real rules on which questions you can and can't ask me. It's just up to me whether I decide to answer them or not. So, all right. Okay, already heaps and heaps and heaps of questions. Someone got in early with a question. Dan the Man, presumably a troll account. Under 5 minutes, the crowd is getting restless with excitement. Here we go, Topher. Here we go. All right, mate. Welcome. Enjoy. I'm just as happy to see trolls as I am anybody else. So no problem there as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to get this cigar lit up. Then I'm going to take you through, as much for my own sake as anybody else, how I ended up saying the word yes when someone asked me to run for politics, and why. What do I hope to get out of it? What do I think we can achieve, and how? What do we do from here in order to actually make something good out of me making this slightly crazy choice? Anyway, today I'm going to light up. It's a decent ring gauge cigar. This is a Perdomo ESV. This is their Connecticut. These actually get aged in a ex-bourbon barrel, and it gives them a lovely flavor profile. The wrapper comes from from Ecuador, which is where the best Connecticut wrappers are grown. And then it is aged, like I said, in barrels, ex-bourbon barrels. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful flavor profile. I'm going to heat it. I'm going to light it using, it's actually a camping stove, but you get the ceramic nice and hot and glowing. And I'm going to light that up. I can't show you the process of lighting because I need both hands to actually control it. But while I concentrate on this, let me talk to you a little bit about politics and why I said yes. Well, those of you that have been following me for a long time, you know that I talk about Plan B. Okay, I think about a lot of things. I talk about a lot of things, and I try to be really transparent. Pretty much, if I'm having a serious think about something, I'll bring it up at some point. I'm not trying to be clever. I'm just thinking through stuff. I'm trying to live life. I'm trying to do life, the same as what you're doing. And I get to share it with you guys, which is pretty cool. So if I'm thinking through something, I tend to bring it up. And so I've been talking about Plan B and my very, very grave concerns about the future of Victoria for some time. That will come as a surprise to nobody that's been following me. Getting there. Um, so the thought of leaving Victoria was unthinkable to me 5 or 6 years ago. 2014. Wow, 8 years ago. Goodness. I was the same as what I'm sure many others are. Stay and fight. If things aren't going well in your home, you stay, you fight, you change it. And of course, we've all seen the Hollywood movies. We know that good always triumphs over evil, right? Then I went to Venezuela, 2014. If you've been following me for a while, you already know the story. I saw what it looks like when a place gets destroyed by socialism, gets destroyed internally by its own government. I saw it with my own eyes. And I met a man there. I'll tell the short version of the story. I met a man there who had tried to stop Hugo Chavez from taking power. He'd tried to stop the socialists. He campaigned, he protested, he got involved in the elections, he did all the stuff. Oh, yes, that's lovely. And he was unsuccessful, and Hugo Chavez took power. And he did exactly what he was expected to do. He turned it into a socialist hellhole. And this gentleman I met in a jazz bar in a basement in downtown Caracas. He looked at me and he said, the thing I didn't do was make a plan for how to get my family out if we lost. I didn't make a plan B. And that has stuck with me ever since. Sorry, I'm just going to boot a spammer here. Block user. Someone's just posting a whole bunch of random URLs. You know, and that stuck with me ever since. I've never forgotten that he never made a plan B. And so he had to watch his son lose his business. And now his grandson growing up and suffering the effects of malnutrition, completely dysfunctional education system, non-existent healthcare, etc. Knowing that others had got out, others had been able to get out of Venezuela, they'd seen what was coming and they got out. And that was where my head was at and has been for some time. So, and I still think having a plan B is a pretty damn good idea. But my wife and I went on a road trip recently. Took the whole family, the two kids. We went from Melbourne. We went up through Griffith into Dubbo, Mudgee, Tamworth, Toowoomba, crossed to Brizzy, and then came down mostly down the coast via Sydney and then home via Albury. And part of the purpose of that trip, part of it was just to get out of Victoria, because I've fallen out of love with Melbourne. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But part of it was also as a fact-finding mission. I mean, if we're going to leave Victoria, it doesn't automatically mean we have to leave Australia. There's plenty of other places in Australia, amazing places in Australia, good people, less bad governments, etc. And so part of it was as a fact-finding mission and trying to see where else would we live. Now, I've been to Tassie a bunch of times, so we didn't need to go to Tassie for that fact-finding mission. I already knew that Tassie was a great place to live and was a very good option. I've got family there, I've got cousins there, and I've got my sister there. So I already knew that. So we headed north into some areas where I didn't really know so well, and my wife didn't know so well, on a fact-finding mission. Where would we go? If we were going to stay in Australia, where would we go? And so we did that. We got back, and yeah, there are some beautiful places in Australia. There are some great places in Australia. There are some great people in Australia. None of what we saw totally grabbed us, but we looked at places and went, "Yep, we could go here." That's but nothing really grabbed us. But in the car on the way home from Albury on the very last day, we were driving at night. The two kids were asleep, and the two kids were asleep. We were talking, and my wife said to me, "Okay, fine. Come November, let's just move out of Victoria." And I said, "You mean if Daniel Andrews wins, we'll move out of Victoria?" And she said, "No, let's just move out of Victoria. Let's just get out. Let's just clear our heads." And I kind of felt that really deeply when she said it. I'd been telling myself, "Oh, if we can get rid of Daniel Andrews, then I'll stay in Victoria," and blah blah blah. But honestly, I was driving through the city just the other day doing some work, and looking around at the buildings in the city, it's not the same as what it was before. I don't see Flinders Street Station anymore. I see the place where Matt Lawson got shot. I don't see the shrine. I see the place where we got shot at. I don't see Elizabeth Street. I see the place where the Bearcat got rolled out and they just started shooting at people indiscriminately. I don't see Vic Market. I see a Kettling. I don't see Parliament House. I see pregnant women being held hostage for hours in the blazing sun by police that just wanted to prove a political point. So it's not the same place for me anymore. And when my wife said that, I was just like, yes, I need to stop this idea. Not that I'm giving up on Victoria, but I need to leave Victoria for a while. Melbourne has kind of left me. So with that kind of settled, I mean, we didn't really talk about it much more because that was it. It was kind of, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that. And then I received a phone call 1, maybe 2 days later. And it was from the president of the Liberal Democrats. And they'd already asked me if I would run, and I gave it a really serious thought about running in the lower house here in Victoria for them. And I then ultimately went, no, I'm not going to do that. And I decided I wasn't going to. But he rang me back and he said, look, I know you're probably going to say no, but I need to ask, how do you feel about moving to Tassie? And it was that same feeling as when my wife kind of went, let's leave Victoria. It was that same kind of like, yeah. I've been to Tassie a bunch of times on business on occasions, as a tourist on other occasions, did the whole motorcycle trip, did all that sort of stuff. I've got friends down there. I've got family down there. And I was like, yeah, yes. I'm a dad now. I've got 2 kids. It's an amazing place to raise a family. And it just sat with me. And I went, okay, talk to me. What are you talking about? And he said, would you be our lead Senate candidate in Tasmania? Well, that's a different question. Do you want to move to Tassie? Do I want to move to Tassie? Yeah, actually, I do. Do I want to be in politics? Well, that's actually, hang on a second. That's a bit more of a complicated question, right? Because the answer is no. I don't want to be in politics. But I can't get away from it either. I've literally on multiple occasions I've stopped posting on my Topher page, not in the last couple of years since all the COVID stuff kicked off, but if you go back into the years before that, there were multiple times, and there was one occasion, I think last half of 2017, first half of 2018, something like that. I didn't post for nearly a year. I basically just abandoned the whole thing because, whatever. It hasn't ever made me anything resembling an income. It occasionally pays for itself for a few months, but that's about it. Most of the time it's costing me money. So I'm literally paying for the privilege of talking about politics. It makes no sense. It made sense when I was younger, when I was single, when I was driving a forklift, making buttloads of money. I didn't care that it was costing me. But time went by, I got married, I had kids, and really it hadn't changed. It was still costing me money to do it. So I tried to kill it off on multiple occasions. And people kept on asking me to come back and do stuff, which I kept on being dumb enough to say yes. So my dad used to have a saying, if you keep answering a question the same way, but the question keeps coming up again, try answering it the other way and see what happens. So I keep being asked, will you run in politics? Will you go into politics? Would you do this? And then I keep saying no. I got offered the lead Senate candidate position for Victoria for a different political party this coming election. I won't say who, but they are one of the parties that has a shot at getting a Victorian Senate seat. It's not unreasonable to think that they could get that. And I was offered their lead Senate candidate position in Victoria. And I thought long and hard about it, and I knocked them back. Then subsequent to that, I knocked back the Liberal Democrats as a lower house candidate for them. I don't want to be in politics. But I've said many times, and some of you will laugh because you will have heard me say it, but I've said many times, we need politicians who don't want to be there. And I guess that started to play on my mind as well as I was pondering this question. And I genuinely don't want to be there. And I tell you what, actually, this happened after I'd made my mind up, but seeing now the speeches that Malcolm Roberts, that George Christensen gave today, 2 days ago, sorry, seeing the different speeches that are being said, I'm like, I don't have to play the game. I can get in there and say what needs to be said, and just I forget fitting in, forget making friends, forget getting along. Get in there and say what needs to be said. And so that's actually been really kind of encouraging to me as I think about it. It's almost like a prison sentence, 6 years being a senator. It's like a prison sentence, but maybe that's good. I don't know. I keep telling you that that's good. We need people that don't want to be there to be there. Maybe that's good. So I sat down with my wife. We talked it through, and we went, well, hang on. What's not to like about moving to Tassie? Well, pretty much nothing. Tassie is amazing. Cost of living is very high, as it is everywhere in Australia at the moment, and Tassie is no exception. Very expensive to buy a house. Tassie faces a lot of the same challenges that we're facing everywhere. The same inflation, the same cost of living challenges. Even worse over-regulation than most of the rest of Australia in many respects. Although I will say that Premier Gutwein did a better job than most other states when it came to COVID. Not perfect. I'm not going to give him a clean bill of health. There are certainly mandates, etc., that are happening that should not be happening. But he certainly didn't go the full Dan Andrews. So I'll at least credit him with that. But yeah, so I sat down and I went, okay, I've just had a conversation with my wife. We're leaving Victoria. No matter what, that's what she said. That's what she wanted to do, and I went, "Yeah, that sits with me. That fits. Let's do that." 2 days later, I got a phone call. Would you like to move to Tassie? Yeah, actually, yes, I actually would. And then the shoe dropped. Do you want to run for senator? Well, the answer is no, I don't. But I've decided that I'm going to. I've decided that I'm going to. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. The reality is, politics in Australia is changing right now more than it has at any other point in my lifetime. We are probably looking at a moment that is going to be historically compared to the founding of the Liberal Party. Was that 1950s, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, which it may not. This is going to be looked back on as a time of change, as significant or more significant than that. It was at 1992 the Federal Greens were founded, and they've certainly changed the face of politics in the 30 years since then. But I actually think that what we're seeing now is going to be more profound than that. I think it's going to change the face of politics even more than what they did. And the chance to be a part of that, maybe. I mean, look, it's incredibly uncertain. Any of these things is incredibly uncertain. Will you win? Will you get in? I don't know. I don't know. But like everything that I do, I'm going to give it a red hot go. And here's what I think is important. And this, I'm so inspired by Craig Kelly, by Malcolm Roberts, by George Christensen, by their boldness, especially recently, right? I feel like all three of them have just been ramping up as time has gone by. And now that we're on the eve of an election, George Christensen is giving his valedictory speech as he's on his way out the door. And COVID has now reached the stage that it has. These guys are just off the chain. And I'm just looking at it going, yes. Yes. What if instead of someone at the end of their term getting that, what if someone came into Parliament with that already? And after 6 years, how much might they have actually influenced the culture of Parliament House? I'm not talking about the culture wars. I'm talking about inside Parliament House. How many opportunities will they have had along the way to hold people accountable, to call people out, and to make some sort of a difference? Well, none of us can answer that question. We don't know in advance. But if we don't actually have a crack at it, then we'll never know. We'll never know what we could do or what difference we could have made. And I've never been one to die wondering. I've never been one to be intimidated, and I've never been one to back down from standing for what I believe is right. I think I've proved that in the last 2 years. So what if we could take that and bring that into Canberra? So that's really it. that was the chain of events. That was the progression. Now I get a couple of common questions, and I've seen a lot of questions scrolling through. So let me answer a couple of common questions. Why Tassie? Well, there's a number of reasons. So Tassie, a lot of people don't realize Tassie actually has some really incredible political history, and they've punched way above their weight over the years, and I think they can continue to do that. Um, in 1972, the United Tasmania Group was founded, which is the first ever Greens group to actually contest elections. Now, Greens parties are a part of politics all over the world. That came from Tasmania. The United Tasmania Group contested a few elections, and they dissolved, and they came back, and then they dissolved again, and then ultimately, out of that, the people involved, Bob Brown, etc., then formed the Tasmanian Greens and then the Australian Greens in 1992, and they have shaped and heavily influenced Australian politics ever since. The greatest prime minister that we've ever had, Lyons, came out of Tasmania. And he came in shortly after the end of the First World War, Great Depression kind of era. And he changed everything. He came in and went, right, we are paying off this debt, the war debt. We're paying this off. And the country got behind him, and he did. He cleared the war debt for Australia in a relatively short amount of time. One of the best prime ministers I think we've had in our entire history was a Tasmanian, the only Tasmanian, by the way, to be a prime minister. So, and we also, what's funny, Tasmania, and I talked about this in the speech that I gave, announcing my candidacy. Tasmania is almost this beautiful little microcosm where you can see things so clearly, and the cause and effect is so clear. And I think that's by virtue of being its own island within Australia, by virtue of having a relatively modest population compared to many other Australian states. Where just as a for instance, in 1992, I think it was, just by coincidence, same year that the Greens were formed. 92, the Lark Distillery, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there was a guy who wanted to start making whiskey in Tassie. And he worked with the federal MP to get the ban removed. There was a ban that wouldn't allow them to start these micro distilleries and micro breweries, etc. And so they got that removed in 1992. And now this year, 30 years later, they won best whiskey in the world, better than anything out of Scotland this year. Right? It only took them 30 years to conquer the world once the government got out of the way. And I just sit there and go, what an example we could set if we could get the government out of their way, if we could get the government out of the way of entrepreneurs in Tasmania and let them off the chain. What could Tasmania become? There's no reason why Tasmania couldn't become an economic powerhouse in the vein of somewhere like a Singapore. It just takes some forward thinking. It takes some good tax policy, some good corporate governance policy that makes it an inviting place for multinational headquarters. Why couldn't that happen? I don't see any reason why that couldn't happen. I mean, obviously, it's got incredible history, the architecture there, the history there, the exploration of Antarctica, maritime history, obviously very, very much a part of their culture. But then you drive through, you go right through, places like Tunbridge in the middle, you look at, the Bluestone bridges and that sort of stuff. I mean, there is just history from the middle to the coast, the north to south, everywhere you look. I've also got a really big soft spot for the aurora. And I've never seen one with my own eyes, but I've seen incredible photographs. And if you're lucky, down in the south of Tassie, you'll see auroras from time to time. And I find that pretty appealing as well. So I think there's just an enormous amount that Tassie has going for it. But it is being held back by over-regulation. And guess what I've been banging on about for 12 years? The need to reduce over-regulation and set people free. So I think if there was a place where less government and more freedom, which is what the Liberal Democratic Party stand for, where that could make a massive difference in a short amount of time, I think Tasmania is it. I think it could happen anywhere. I mean, Victoria would be a great candidate too, if only we weren't so damn stupid. I'm hoping the people of Tassie are going to be a bit smarter than the people of Victoria have been up to this point in time. But we'll just wait and see how that plays out. So I think Tassie has an awful lot going for it, both from my point of view, for why I would want to live there, but also for what a freedom candidate can bring to Tassie. We've seen it. We've seen it already. 30 years from deregulation to best in the world. That's all it took them to conquer the world. And there are so many other areas where they could do that again, if only Canberra would get out of their way. So that's what I'm about. So, yeah, so that's Tassie. That's okay. People have asked, can you run if you don't live there? You can run. If I win, I'll move there in a heartbeat. I would be thrilled to take my family there. If I don't win, I'm actually going to stay in Victoria until the election so I can vote against Daniel Andrews. So if I win, I'll be in Tassie straight away. If I don't win, we're going to be in Victoria until November, and then we'll decide based on the outcome of the Victorian election, based on certain other things that we've got in play that may make us choose to move overseas. We'll then make decisions about where we want to move from there. But Tassie would definitely be very high up on the list of places to go. So that's the plan. I'm going to contest this election. I will be standing as an unashamed freedom candidate. Less government, more freedom, lower taxes, way lower spending so that we can repay the debt without jacking up taxes, massive reductions in red tape and regulation, and setting people free. That's it. That's it. That's what we're about. And I think, people say, oh, you can't represent Tasmanians if you're not from Tasmania. Really? They don't face the same issues that Australians face? Are they not facing cost of living issues? Are they not facing over-regulation issues? Are they not on the hook for the same national debt as the rest of Australia? This idea that the only person who can possibly understand you must be your next-door neighbour is just absurd. The fact is, we're Australians, and I'm wanting to be elected into, or I'm asking to be elected into the Australian Federal Parliament so that I can represent the interests of Tasmanians and all Australians, because honestly, we're not as different as some people like to make out. We're facing a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same challenges, and a lot of those problems are being created by Canberra. So let's focus on that. So, all right, I'm seeing lots of comments about how cold it gets down there. Yes, I understand it does get chillier than Melbourne, but you know what? I'm a cold weather person. And you can only, if you're cold, you can add more layers. I'm wearing my hoodie tonight because it's a little bit chilly in Melbourne. But there's only so many layers you can take off before they throw you in prison. So, Queensland is not for me. Not my thing. Right. So, that's where I'm at. That's what's going on. Now, over to you guys. Over to your questions. I've just seen question after question after question streaming through. So thank you for all of the many questions. I'm not going to scroll back. If you have a question, please chuck it into the chat now, and let's have a chat. Stuart's got a good eye. Yes, that is a bottle of lark. That is the that one there. That is the Wolf release number 4. That was a particularly good drop, and that is all gone now. Which electorate? So this is the Tasmanian Senate. So anyone in Tasmania can vote. So each state, the senators represent the entire state. Yes, I agree, Mai. I don't have an issue voting for you, even not being here. However, I do feel that you'd have a better chance if you were already here. You're absolutely right. I would have a better chance because it is going to be an issue for some people. I don't think it should be an issue, but I can understand that it is for some people. So you're absolutely right. But I can't literally, we've got a lease, we've got business commitments, we've got stuff in Victoria. And I can't just drop everything and move, especially given that if I don't get elected, I do still want to vote against Daniel Andrews. That's important to me. So I don't want to be leaving Victoria unless it is for that. Otherwise, I'm staying in Victoria long enough to vote against Daniel Andrews. So that's the intent there. Now, Andrew, no talking trash about Tassie, thank you. We're in Tassie, so it's for the Senate, which covers the whole of Tassie. I would need to live somewhere not too far from Hobart to the airport, or to Launceston, again, the airport, because I'd be commuting back and forth to Canberra multiple times every year, etc. So unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to live out in Tunbridge or down in Queenstown and other places that I've been and have thoroughly enjoyed. And I love more that wilderness aspect of Tasmania, that west coast. Oh, incredible. As a young 20-something-year-old motorcyclist, touring around that part of the world was just incredible. So as much as that appeals to me, just the practicality of having to be close to an airport where I can get flights to Canberra. So I am going to be in one of the population centres, or not far from there. When is the election? It hasn't been called yet. Hasn't been called. The expectation is it's going to be the 21st of May, which is the last day that it can be. Just the logistics of when it gets called, the amount of time that has to be allowed from when it gets called to when it gets held, etc., it's pretty much a given now that the election is going to be the 21st of May. If my memory is serving me correct, I think that's it. You know what? I'm just going to, there you go. Instead of pouring 2 double shots, I'll pour 4 shots. And that will keep me going for a while. So yeah, by the end of May. Well, there you go. Timely question. Is that water or are you on the gin and tonics tonight? No, that was actually just water. I've got to say, Daniel, Albury was one of 2 places in our travels that really impressed us. And no offense, Albury was a surprise package for me. I've been there a bunch of times. I'd never really paid a lot of attention. It was not a place. If you'd said to me, "Oh, do you want to move to Albury?" I would have been like, "Thanks, but yeah, no thanks." But actually, there were 2 places on the mainland. There were 2 places that we just went, you know what, this is nice, and we could live here. And one was actually Albury, and that shocked us both, but it was true. The other was actually the south coast, south of Sydney. So go south of Port Kembla, south of whatever that's called, south of Port Kembla, down towards Kiama, etc. But that is seriously, like, we can't afford that. So of the places we can afford, Albury's remarkably affordable. I know you guys don't think it is because it's gone up so much, but compared to Melbourne, it's pretty jolly affordable. So moving to Albury would be one of the other pretty highly ranked contenders, assuming that I don't win in Tassie and that we choose to leave Victoria in November, which I think is a given. Do I have a short list of places outside of Australia? Yes, if we leave Australia, it'll be for one of 2 destinations. Possibly the US if we are successful in the green card lottery. So we entered the green card lottery. Obviously, if I'm successful at becoming a senator for Tasmania, I will be rejecting that should we get lucky enough to win. Chances are we won't. Odds are well and truly stacked against us. But we would potentially head there if we did get lucky with the green card lottery, although I have some hesitations about that anyway. The primary destination is actually going to be Central America and the Caribbean. So there are places there where it's relatively easy to get second passports, residency, etc. And as long as we're able to earn our income online, then we can keep working and our money goes a fair way. At least it does at the moment until hyperinflation kicks in. Our money goes a fair way. So that would be Central America would be the option there. Yes. Yes, I did. The surprise package for me was actually a brandy. I got stuck into the Sullivan's Cove XO brandy. That was nice. I'm not normally a brandy guy, but boy, Sullivan's Cove, guys, get on it. What are the odds of winning? Low. I'm not going to BS you. Low. But here's the logic. Whether or not I win kind of isn't really all that much up to me. There's so many elements of chance. Which ballot draw do I get? Am I near the front? Am I near the back? Can I get any traction in the mainstream media? They're going to ignore me for as long as they can, but if I manage to play my cards right, I might put them in a position where they can't ignore me. Now, if I do that, then they'll attack me instead, but maybe that's better than being ignored. And there's all these variables, and a lot of them you don't have a lot of control over. How many people are going to be willing to stand on polling booths and hand out how to vote cards? How many people are going to be willing to put signs in their front yard? I don't know the answers to these questions yet. So I don't really know for sure whether I'm going to win or what my chances really are. So my objective is to win if I can. That's my job, right? As I've accepted the candidacy, that means in good faith I have to do everything that I reasonably can to give myself the best possible chance of winning. But to a very significant degree, that's out of my hands. But what is in my hands is to leave the Liberal Democratic Party in Tasmania in better condition than it was when I came. More members, more volunteers, more engagement, more people showing up to branch meetings, more enthusiasm, so that the next candidate that comes along for the Liberal Democrats in Tasmania, which probably won't be me in 3 years, like this is hopefully, fingers crossed, this is the one and only time I ever say yes to this, right? But the next candidate that comes along and runs for the Liberal Democrats in Tasmania isn't faced with a party that is relatively unknown, but is actually faced with a party that has some profile and has some structure there and has volunteers and so forth. So really, that's the focus for me. That could turn into winning. I think I was about to say almost a certainty. That's a dangerous thing to say. There is a very high probability that the 6th Senate spot in Tasmania will go to one of the freedom-friendly minor parties. I think there's a very high probability of that. And the maths is simple. To get half a quota, because for that sixth spot, you just need more than anybody else. You just need to get over half that. To get there, you would need somewhere in the order of less than 30,000 votes. Okay. Now, it's a relatively small state, so that's still a substantial percentage. It's, your 7-8% mark. That's roughly what you need to get. But One Nation already poll about 2.5% in Tasmania at the last federal election. UAP are going to poll well, and they're going to spend a lot of money polling well. We're going to poll well because I've got some profile down there, and there's a lot of people discovering the Liberal Democrats, thanks to David Limbrick and Tim Quilty and the amazing work that they've done and the profile that's been built over this insane COVID time. So you take three parties that are all going to get, let's say, 2 to 3% each, and it's very easy to get to 7%. So if our people just vote for the respective party that they like best and then preference the other two, well, I don't know which one of us is going to win, but one of us is going to win. It's going to come down to whoever gets the most primary votes, most likely, right? We'll then gather the preferences of the other two, is probably how it will work out. But I don't know which one that will be. But I think we've got a good shot at making sure the Greens do not get that last seat, or that Jackie Lambie does not get that last seat in Tasmania. And that really is the focus. Deprive them of that seat. Make sure that the Liberal Democrats are in really good shape so that the next person to run in Tasmania, or the next people to run in Tasmania, because let's not forget there's 5 lower house seats there as well, are inheriting something that's more organised and larger and has more leverage and more resources available. Will I win? I might. But honestly, that's not in my hands. I've just got to run the best campaign I can run. Oops. I didn't mean to click on that one, but cool. Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate that. Pete, this is a good question as well. He says, as a Victorian, I'm sad you didn't run for us, but I'd support you in any endeavour. I'm not going to run in the Senate for Victoria because we've already got amazing Senate candidates in Victoria. David Limbrick, he has runs on the board. He's been an MP at a state level, sure, but he's got runs on the board. He understands how it works, and he's done an outstanding job for us. So I want David Limbrick to win as our lead Senate candidate here in Victoria. Then if, I don't know, something happens and there's a massive vote in Victoria, we've then got Crystal Mitchell, former police officer, who resigned basically in moral protest for what Victoria Police were doing. Someone who, again, understands the bureaucratic world, the corporate world. She's worked in senior corporate positions within Victoria Police. That's going to train her and translate well across into politics. So even if we've got 2 senators in Victoria, we've already got that covered. And then there's Caroline White, who's a small business owner, took an amazing and courageous stand during COVID. And so if by some bizarre miracle the Liberal Democrats got 3 Senate candidates in Victoria, all elected, there are 3 amazing candidates already. We don't need a 4th, right? There was no point running in the Senate in Victoria. So that was why I was never going to do that. And I would have said no to Tassie. If he'd asked me a week earlier, I would have said no. No, thank you. Just because I was of the mind I'm not running in politics. But because I'd had that conversation with my wife and we'd said, you know what, we're leaving Victoria. That's it. We're leaving Victoria. And then he led with the question, do you want to move to Tassie? And internally I was like, yeah, I do. I think that's what softened me up. I think that's why I had a moment of weakness. Dear. So anyway, yeah, okay, here is a great question. Stephen, you're on the money here. How will you stop from getting corrupted? Yeah. Let's talk about this, because I've seen good people that I knew before they got into politics, go into politics, and within months, they're being trotted out on Sky News saying things that I know they don't believe to be true, or at least they didn't 6 months ago. And yet here they are on our television screen saying stuff. I'm like, what happened to you? What happened to you? And here's the thing. I can't go into Canberra assuming that I'm magically immune to whatever it was that happened to them. If I'm going to get a different result, if I'm going to be a different person, I have to do something different. I have to hold my values in a different way to what they do. So this is something I do think about. And I've certainly been thinking about since I accepted the position as the lead Senate candidate, how do I actually make sure that in the event that I'm voted in, I actually do what I think I would do and what I want to do rather than just getting assimilated into that culture? And I've got a couple of answers. One is actually in defense of politicians, because I see a lot of times, I see this with David Limbrick and Tim Quilty, and I see this with Craig Kelly and with others, with Malcolm Roberts, people really having a go at them for you supported the Animal Rights Party on this bill, or you did this, or you did that. And people are reacting emotionally at a relatively superficial level without taking the time to actually understand what happens in politics. And that there's more than one feature to every bill. Bills aren't a single thing. So when the news says, oh, it was the such and such bill, and this person voted against it, or that person voted for it, okay, but there are other things in that bill as well that can sometimes be the reason why someone would reject it, or they might say, listen, we need to split this bill in half, separate those issues, and I'll vote for you on this one, but I cannot approve this bill while this other thing is in there. So there's all sorts of other reasons why people would go, well, hang on. And I've been guilty of this as well. I've had a crack at MPs before. I've gone, oh, well, you should have supported that, or you shouldn't have supported that. And then they've come on social media a little while later and gone, well, hang on, hear me out. This is why. And by the time they're done, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, I feel like a bit of an idiot now. So we do need to keep that in mind. Sometimes we need to understand a little bit more the nuances of what's going on. However, you're absolutely right. And I've seen it with my own eyes. People go into politics and they get corrupted, they change. How will I make sure that that's not me? I think there's a couple of things that I'm mindful of that are going to help me. And then there's a few things that I need to do and actively be conscious of on an ongoing basis to try and protect myself from doing that. First things first, some of them just can't handle the heat. They start getting the criticism, they start getting the judgment, they start getting treated badly by other MPs, and they just want to be part of the club. I'm not that guy. I think I've proved that over the last 2 years. Once I decide the hill that I'm going to die on, I damn well stand there and die on that hill if necessary. So I think in a sense, I've already passed the first part of the test, that I'm not a wind vane. I'm not going to be sitting there, which way is the wind blowing? What's going to be popular today? I'm not that guy. So that's going to help in the first instance. In the second instance, I think it's being in those major parties makes it so much more difficult to have principles. Because in those major parties, if you want to get anywhere in those major parties, you have to toe the party line. And that's really toxic. So someone comes in and goes, right, I've got these principles. I want to stand for this stuff. And the party goes, no, you're going to do this over here. It's very easy for someone to either be weak and just go, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that thing. Or even if they're not being weak, to rationalize. And they sit there and they go, no, well, hang on. If I don't toe the party line, then I'll only ever be a backbencher. I'll only ever be a nobody. And that means I don't get to change anything. But if I just toe the party line for a little while, then maybe I'll get on the front bench. Maybe I'll be a minister. Maybe one day I'll be the prime minister, and then I can make a real difference. And so some of them actually rationalize the compromise. They sit there and they go, actually, this is going to be good in the long term. I'm going to play the long-term game. And that temptation is really strong in the major parties. And I think, in my opinion, that's why some of the people that I've seen have sold out on this false promise that I'll compromise in the short term, because then that'll put me where I need to be in the long term. And that's where the corruption and the compromise comes from. The other thing is as well, and this is the thing that I can really control, is the bubble. There is a very real problem with the Canberra bubble. And politicians make the mistake of thinking that they're well informed because they're surrounded by advisors who give them lots of data and information. The problem is, most of those advisors are bureaucrats that live in Canberra, or are political staffers that work for political parties. They're people who are also inside the bubble. And they mistake data and information for understanding, right? You can have all the data in the world, but until you sit down at the pub with some bloke who's just worked a 60-hour week in a mine and is knocking back a few beers at the end of the week and gives you a piece of his mind, then all of a sudden you go, now there's understanding, there's perspective on this issue, because he lives it every day, whereas I'm just reading about the data that's been collated by a bureaucrat who's on $350,000 a year. So the bubble is a huge problem, where they don't become corrupted because they want to become corrupted. They end up being corrupted because they've actually drifted. They've actually lost their way. They're lost in the bubble. And they can't actually, because the bubble moves as a whole, they don't know where the bubble's gone, but they just know they're still in it. So they must be okay. And then that becomes their frame of reference. Stepping outside of the bubble becomes a very difficult thing for them to do, because they'll get the criticism for all of their colleagues and everyone else going, what are you doing that for? You're stepping outside of the bubble. So that's probably the one thing that I can control, and that is to stay deeply, genuinely engaged with people who are not in that bubble, making sure that on any given issue, I'm listening to and being advised by people who are not in that bubble, not mistaking data for understanding. But that's an ongoing challenge. That's not something that you can just take for granted and go, oh, well, I'm immune. I won't be affected. No, hang on. Every other person told themselves that too. So that is an absolutely top-notch question. And one that I will be paying a lot of attention to if I am elected for the entire tenure of my time in politics, because that is the biggest danger. What experience do we need if we want to throw a hat in the ring? If you wanted to be a candidate, you need life experience more than anything else. You don't need political experience. You need life experience, whether that's in business or in some kind of a career, or teacher, police officer, blah, 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 whatever it may be. One of the reasons why I've kept saying no to people wanting me to get into politics is because I actually think I could use another 10 years of real world experience. I actually think I'm a little bit too young. Now, I don't think we should have a law that says people under a certain age can't get into politics, but I think every decade of life experience is a good thing. So I wouldn't be sitting here saying, oh, well, you have to have this or you have to have that. But you do have to have perspective and life experience. You do need to be able to think through complicated issues, and you do need to have thick skin, because people will come out and say all sorts of things that you don't deserve. And that used to hurt me. That used to bother me. It doesn't anymore. 12 years of being a political commentator will do that. But the ones that really sting are where they come out and they criticize you, and you look at it and you go, actually, you've got a point. And they might not be 100% right, but in what they said, there might be something that you're like, actually, yeah, I could have done that better. I should have done that better. And you've got to then be able to process that, improve yourself, but still get back up on your feet and be able to keep going and not get too bothered by that. So, it's more about who you are than sort of any qualifications that you've got. You will win, no doubt. Well, that's a very, very positive way of thinking. Yeah. So Karen makes a good point. I haven't heard a peep out of any current Tasmanian politicians supporting freedom of choice with the mandate nonsense, or raising concern for the injuries being caused. They're all compliant, like the majority of the sheep here. But this is actually what potentially creates the opportunity. Because like I said, we only need 7%, 8% between all the freedom-friendly minor parties preferencing each other. We only need a relatively small percentage of the Tasmanian population to then make sure that Jackie Lambie doesn't get that last seat, or it's not her in person, it's someone else in her party, to make sure that the Greens don't get that last seat. And so because there's no one else competing, as it were, for that vote, the Liberal Party aren't out there trying to attract those voters. That means that when those voters go looking for who can I vote for, voices like mine will stand out a lot. So there's actually opportunity in there. Okay, the differences between our voting preference and parties preferencing each other. This is a great question. The short answer, Jane, is parties no longer preference each other. They used to. That was part of the system and how it worked. That was abolished a couple of years ago before the last federal election. Now, your preference only goes where you send it. So when we talk about party preferences, so for example, the Liberal Democrats, our number 2 preference is the UAP. It's not that we're sending your vote to the UAP. It means that when you get the how to vote card, as you're walking up to the voting place and there's a volunteer standing there wearing one of our shirts and handing out how to vote cards, it's going to say, hey, vote number 1 for us, vote number 2 for UAP, and number 3 and number 4 and number 5 and number 6. We don't direct your vote. You can do whatever you want on your ballot. And whatever you say is where your vote goes. So party preferences, as they used to exist, do not exist anymore. Am I as well known in Tassie as I am in Victoria? No, not even close. I'm very grateful to the people that showed up. We had about 30 or so people show up to the campaign launch in Hobart, which was great on very short notice. So I'm very, very grateful to those of you that did come. But no, Tassie is not somewhere where they've really been affected. I mean, for 12 years, I've been talking about water management in the Murray-Darling Basin, and that's the north of Victoria and the south and inland New South Wales. So obviously I've got a big following up there. I think that's part of why I enjoyed Albury so much, was I was just meeting so many amazing people that wanted to talk to me. It was great. But obviously down in Tassie, they're not affected by any of that. I'm very well known in Victoria because of the last 2 years and the stance that I've taken on the vaccine mandates and on all the lockdowns and the laws against, or so-called laws against protest, etc. Again, Tassie were relatively sheltered from all of that. And Premier Gutwein did a better than average by Australian standards job with all of that. So I don't think they've necessarily felt that same level of pain. And therefore they haven't had a reason to come and sort of find me or discover me online. Having said that, there are a lot of Tasmanians that have family in Victoria and they've been hearing about what's happened, or there are a lot of Tasmanians that have lived in Victoria for a few years and then gone back to Tassie, and they know the place well and they care about what happens here. So it's not that there's nothing there, but it's certainly nothing like what it is in Victoria or in, it turns out, Albury. Did I enjoy the award-winning whiskies? Yes, I did. Does Tassie have the same mandates as Vic? Slightly different, but fundamentally, yes. They are mandating vaccines for all kinds of workers, etc. Did you read that I was joining the Liberal Democrats? I've been a member of the Liberal Democrats for a little while, so I'm a financial member. I've paid the membership fee, but I'm now a candidate for the Liberal Democrats. Got to be honest, Dan, I haven't been following what's been happening in Canberra for the last little while. I went on that break to just clear my head and get away from it all, and I haven't tuned back into it since I got home, so I can't comment on that. Sorry. Not a coalition in the sense of like your liberal national coalition, but an alliance perhaps more in the sense of something like your Labor Greens, where they are very much two different parties. They compete against each other in seats. They're, each of them is trying to win because there are some substantial differences between the two. But ultimately, when it comes to policy, there's enough overlap and there's enough similarity that they're going to work together on policy. They work together on preferences, etc. So it'd probably be something that would look a little bit more like that. And that's already happened with the United Australia Party and the Liberal Democrats, having given each other our number 2 preference spot. Now, remember, that's only on the how to vote cards. That's not actually us sending the preferences to them. It's just what we write on the how to vote cards. So that is already happening. How does running affect one's plan B, alternate passports, etc.? It doesn't, because it's on such a short timeline. It'll be all done and dusted by May. And I will know by the end of May whether, actually, Senate can take a little while, particularly for that number 6 Senate seat. So by early mid-June, I will know whether or not I'm a senator, and I'll probably know on election night, because it's very likely that it just won't happen. And it'll be a mathematical impossibility for it to be me, at which point, great, I can wipe my hands of it and get on with the other things that we were already working on. I'm sorry to leave too. But like I said, I don't feel like I'm leaving so much as I feel like this isn't my home anymore. It doesn't feel like home anymore. And that's I've lived here since I was 2.5 years old. And I've traveled a bit, but I've never lived anywhere else. So that's a sad thing to have to say. But as I just internally process what I've seen and what's happened here, this doesn't feel like home anymore. Karen, I absolutely believe you. I think it's been an awesome place to visit every single time I've been there. Okay, 99 hairpins on the road into Queenstown. So that's on the road in coming from Hobart, from the Hobart direction. So we went anti-clockwise. Sorry, going to talk motorcycles for a second here. We came in on the boat, and then we went anti-clockwise, Burnie, and then down past Cradle Mountain and so forth. And that run out of Queenstown, so we stayed overnight in Queenstown. That run out of Queenstown was genuinely the most fun I have ever had on a motorbike, ever. And I'm a guy that does track day, or not anymore. I'm a guy that used to do track days. Phillip Island, Broadford Raceway, a bunch of others. That road is mint. There is nothing better. I'm running with the Liberal Democratic Party. So they're not the Liberal Party, for those that do get that confused. I'm getting a warning saying that my internet is slow. So can you just let me know if you can still hear me okay? John Humphreys says, great to have you join the Lib Deb teams. Team Topher, game on. Game on indeed, John. And thank you for asking me the question when you did, because you've now made my life that much more complicated. Thank you. All right. I was always turned off the Liberal Democrats due to the word liberal. I don't blame you, but understand, and I mean, this is academic, this is just semantics, but the word liberal actually has its own meaning. And to something that is liberal, if you're liberal with the icing sugar on top of your pancakes, that means you put a lot on. It's a word of freedom, to liberate, to, to bring freedom. Don't breathe in the smoke. It's not great. Just a tip. So the Liberal Democrats are actually using that word according to its actual meaning. The Liberal Party, founded by Robert Menzies, was supposed to be the party of freedom, but they failed miserably at being that. So whilst I can understand that you're put off by the word liberal, we're actually trying to use it in its correct meaning. Okay, your cultural stance is still grounded in Christianity, i.e. abortion, euthanasia, and do they take a backseat to government overreach, in your opinion? So understand that the Liberal Democrats are not a cultural war fighting party. That's not what we're about. We're about the freedom to make individual choices. So we need to separate. The choices that I would make for myself are absolutely grounded in my theology and in my faith. But I'm not going to force that on somebody else. So an example would be something like the drug war. I have literally never taken an illegal drug. I've actually never even smoked a cigarette, to be honest. And I was in my mid-20s before I started drinking alcohol at all. And I was in my late 20s when I started smoking cigars. So I'm about as clean skinned, not quite as clean skinned as you can get, but I'm close, right? But I don't think that we should be throwing people in prison for taking a drug, for example. So that's where there'd be a separation between, I would make certain decisions for myself, but I don't necessarily believe that that automatically makes it the purview of the government, the role of the government to step in and to legislate that. So for me personally, absolutely yes. But the LDP are not going to be out there fighting the cultural war. Also, I understand a lot of these issues are actually state issues, not federal anyway. So they're actually not things that I would ever get to vote on, even if I did get in as a federal senator. Chris says, you're a legend already, mate. Thank you. Love your commitment to the people of Oz when you win. Going to take up fishing in those beautiful lakes. I would actually like to learn how to fish. I've done very little of it, but I did go out one time with a guy that really knew what he was doing, and we actually caught a bunch of stuff. And boy, that was actually fun. The other times I went out, I had no idea what I was doing, and I caught nothing. And that's boring. But I would actually love to do a lot more hunting. I'm a reasonable shot. I used to be in the Army Reserve. I was an okay shot then. I'm still an okay shot now. And I'd actually love to do more hunting. So that would be probably more where my head would go. Where will you be placed on the scale? Left, center, right? Okay, this is actually a really good question because Australians have been taught by our media to think in terms of left, middle, right. Okay, exactly as per your question there, Kel. I think that's a very inaccurate way of understanding how politics works, because we think that on the far left are the Greens, and then on the left is Labor, then on the right is Liberals, and then on the far right are these far right nut job parties like One Nation or what have you. And a lot of people try and put the Liberal Democrats into this far right nut job kind of category. But actually, if you actually look at our policies, we don't belong there at all, because we're actually trying to empower the individual to make choices for themselves. So to go back to the example I just gave, the drug war, we don't support the idea that we should be ruining people's lives and throwing them in prison because they grew a plant or they sold a plant. That's utterly absurd. But that's a very right-wing thing, the tough on crime kind of stance. No, we're about less government, more freedom. That's what we're about. So I would actually add another dimension to that. You've got your left, you've got your right. But actually, let's create a vertical dimension where you've got less government involvement in your life and more government involvement in your life. And now all of a sudden it starts to make more sense. So for example, the Liberal Party want the government to have quite a lot of involvement in your personal choices around, for example, they support the drug war, and they have in the past supported subsidizing Australian industry because they want Australian manufacturing or Australian this or Australian that. So they want to control certain things, but there's other things that they say, oh no, the government shouldn't control that. Then you've got the Labor Party that really want to control certain things. They want to control more of your money. They want to regulate your business. You have to have a license to be able to work in a given occupation, all that sort of stuff. But then they want to be very liberal and very free, but only in certain areas, right? So they like big government, both of them. They just disagree over what the government should control. And so this is why we keep seeing the government getting bigger over time, because each time one gets in, they make the government bigger in the areas that they think are correct. The Liberal Democrats, we believe in smaller government in all areas, all of them. And so we would actually be much closer to the top of that hypothetical triangle where we don't really belong on the right spectrum at all. We're actually just about less government, more freedom, you making more choices for yourself. Excuse me. How will the court case affect your eligibility to run? It shouldn't. It shouldn't affect it at all because the available penalties for the so-called crime that I'm alleged to have committed just aren't serious enough to affect that. Someone's agreeing with the earlier comment that there's no one in Tassie that is actually good on the mandates. Yeah, but like I said, I think that's actually an advantage. Why not contest David Limbrick's seat? By that, I assume you mean the Southeast metropolitan region in the Victorian state election. Because I can't stay in Victoria. I talked about it a little bit before. I don't know if you were here at the very start, but maybe it'll change between now and then, but I doubt it. But I can't bring myself to stay in Victoria. Does the amount of independents affect the possibilities of one of you getting up as many will still vote major? Not really, because even if there was only one independent, but most people voted major, well, in the end, there's still only the same number of people voting for a minor party. What matters is that the people voting for the minor parties use their preferences correctly. And that's what we need to, that's the message. This is why I'm hammering this message. And I've been hammering it for months, not knowing that I was going to run, that we need to be using our preferences correctly. If I get the chance, 100%. Less government, more freedom. That means the government should not be involved in making decisions around what you must put in your body to have a certain occupation. Now, remember, though, there's a bit of, again, like I talked earlier about nuance. And sometimes things are more complicated than what we want them to be, and we can misinterpret what some people do. I would also support employers, if they present those conditions up front, being allowed to put conditions. So, for example, an owner of a palliative care home might want to appeal to the really paranoid market of people. And so they might turn around and say, right, if you want to work here, you have to be up to date with X, Y, and Z vaccinations. And if they make that clear, that that is a condition of employment made public to prospective employees before they apply for a job, then I think that is absolutely their right because it's their company. And they can then appeal and market themselves to clients who want that perceived sense of safety. And then you'll have another owner of a palliative care facility or an aged care facility, whatever it might be, who might take the opposite approach and say, actually, we're gonna go for the hippie market with all the retiring, all the hippies as they grow old, who don't want to be vaccinated themselves and not going to require my staff to be vaccinated at all. We're talking about private businesses, and as long as there is disclosure and it's not used as coercion on people that already have a job or have already been offered a job, it's a case of this is upfront. These are the conditions of employment, apply or don't apply, but you know, right? Then I would support that as well. So we're about empowering individuals to make choices for themselves. We don't want the government making those decisions, but that doesn't mean that people can't make those decisions. We just want them to be making it at their level rather than being told what to do from above. So again, I absolutely, if I could repeal that, 100% I would. Why federal, not state? Well, because there is a federal election coming up. The state election is not till much later this year. And I didn't actually think I was going to run in any. I sort of went through the chain of events early on in tonight and just sort of talked about what actually led to me making the decision. So that might be worth just going back and having a look at that to understand how I came to that decision. This is a surprise plan B. You think you're surprised? Gosh, I'm surprised too. I've let the cigar go out, so I'm just going to clean out the ash and relight it. Yeah, this is not what I expected, but like I said, John Humphrey's got me in a moment of weakness, and here we are. And honestly, it sits really well with me. I'm really happy with it. I'm glad that I said yes, but I'm still going to give him a hard time and blame him for ruining my life, making me get into politics. All right, so I'm not going to use the big lighter again. Just for a relight, but I'm just going to sit here and very slowly toast the inside of this cigar. I've knocked out all of the ash, all of the burnt ash is gone. So I'm just back to the charred black tobacco. Warm it up, heat it nice and slowly, and just relight. Having a cigar go out on you is not a bad thing. Smoking a cigar too fast is a bad thing. But if it goes out, you can just relight it. It's no big deal. So, suppliers plan B, Chris, absolutely. But as I said to someone else earlier, it's a very short-term thing. Either I win in May or I don't, and I just go back to what I was already working on. So it's a relatively short diversion, although it could become a very long diversion if I win. Yeah, I'm sorry, Flores. Sydney doesn't like me. I don't like Sydney. I don't like the vibe of the place. Sorry about that. So, what about the Hunter? I really, really actually enjoyed Singleton. And my wife really enjoyed Singleton. We were driving around looking at the valley and meeting the people. And my wife said to me, I could live here. This is actually really nice. The flooding is an issue for me, especially having seen a little bit of what had happened further north. And then driving through and there's all the floodwaters, etc. Obviously, I'd want to be pretty careful which property I bought in that part of the world. But it is a beautiful part of the world. Okay, so this is a really interesting one. This is very, very topical at the moment. So, and this is another example where politicians sometimes have to make judgment calls. So let me talk to you about there's actually two issues here in the Indu card. So the most obvious issue, and in my opinion, probably the bigger issue, is the one of individual autonomy. Individuals being able to make decisions about how they spend their money. And the whole point of this card is to control people and what they can do with their money for the government to have visibility so that they can see and invade privacy, etc. And if that's all it was about, 100% opposed to that, right? The government has no business. There is the added wrinkle that this is actually taxpayers' money. That makes it slightly more complicated. I would want to talk it through. I've got a couple of really good people in my life that anytime there's one of these nuanced issues, I want to talk this through with them before I come down on any side or another, because you need to weigh what's the moral imperative here? What's the freedom imperative here? What's the worst of the available evils? That the government is getting unreasonable levels of surveillance and control into people's financial lives, or that we're allowing people to take money that doesn't belong to them or was taken under the threat of force, which is what taxation is, and then potentially abuse and misuse that money. If I, as a politician, abused and misused taxpayers' money, well, that would absolutely be wrong. I think we would all be in 100% agreement on that. So is taxpayers' money paid to welfare recipients to be viewed the same way? I don't think so. My gut instinct is that I would be absolutely opposed to the Indu card and to the government having any level of control or insight into how people are using the money that they get paid. That's my initial response. But there is that secondary issue that I think I would want to sit down and really thrash that out with a couple of people who I think have very good judgment and very, very good moral compasses, and come to a decision. But again, that's one of those things where no matter which way you vote on that issue, someone is going to attack you from one side or the other. Oh, you voted, you supported the Indu card, therefore you support government control of people, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and that would be fair. You voted against the Indu card, therefore you support the government being able to hand out taxpayers' money, and for that taxpayers' money to be completely abused and misused, and you don't care. And that's also a valid criticism. Right? Someone's going to have an attack angle on you, no matter which way you go on this issue. So it's a good example of issues where there are first order issues and there are second order issues. And the problem with many politicians is they go on their gut instinct, the first thing that comes to their head. And so they don't look any deeper to the second and third order issues that arise oftentimes. So it's a mealy-mouthed answer. I'm sorry about that. But my initial answer is I'm 100% opposed to the government controlling how people spend their money or having that level of visibility into people's lives. Completely 100% opposed to that on principle. Do not ever want to be supporting that. I need to have a chat to some good people and think through the second order issue of the fact that this is actually taxpayers' money in this case. Does that change things? I don't know. Probably not, but I'd want to have that conversation. Florida and Texas, maybe and maybe, but also probably not. I'd probably move to Mexico before I'd move to either of those. Am I familiar with the Free State Project? As in the US, in the state of Gosh, I can find it on a map and I can't think of its name. Yes, I am. New Hampshire. New Hampshire. I think it's a brilliant idea in principle, and it might be one that's worth resurrecting in some other form or some other format. Would it work in Australia? Our states are bigger compared to our overall size, so there are some logistical challenges there in terms of getting enough. Okay, sorry, there's people who aren't familiar with it. Let me explain. The Free State Project was this idea that if you got enough people who love freedom to move to a single jurisdiction, a single state, then they effectively end up controlling the legislature. Those people just, if you've got a state of, I'm pulling numbers out of a hat here, I don't know what the numbers actually are, but if you had a state with 500,000 residents in it, let's say New Hampshire, and then you could get another 200,000 people to move there, well, chances are those 200,000 people are now going to be the single biggest voting bloc in the state. And at a local level and at a state level, you can be electing freedom-loving candidates. In theory, the idea is sound. In practice, there are some logistical issues. What they tried to do was get people to commit in advance to moving once a certain threshold was achieved. And I don't know what the actual numbers were. But they said once X tens of thousands of people have committed to moving, then we're going to say go. And if you've committed, then you've committed. You have to do it. You've got to move and come and join the Free State Project. And just through sheer weight of numbers, we will then be able to elect freedom-loving candidates at local levels and state levels and so forth. I love it. I think it's a great idea. I think the logistical challenges and the realities of life, it's very easy for someone to say, yes, I'm on board. It's very difficult for that same person to then make the move once those numbers have been reached. So what would your attrition rate be? Of the people that said, yes, I'll do it, how many would actually do it? Hard to say. But anyway, that's a chat for another time. Sure, Bernie. So I've been to Tassie a bunch of times. I just came back from Tassie literally at 1 o'clock this morning, and I'll be heading there again shortly. I know I have family that live in Tassie. I have cousins and extended family that live in Tassie. I've got friends that live in Tassie. I've got many people living in Victoria who come from Tassie. And again, we're not talking, if I was running for local council, well, yeah, of course you've got to have local knowledge. If I was running for the state government, yeah, you've got to have local knowledge. The federal government is a slightly different beast. Essentially, what I would say is my role is not so much to be controlling Tassie, it's to be getting Canberra out of Tassie as much as possible. So it's not to say that I don't need to understand those issues, but my role is actually to rein in the monster that is Canberra and to get them out of the lives of Tasmanians as much as is humanly possible. And what Tasmanians want is largely the same as what we do. They're Australians. They're facing the same economic situations, the same cost of living crisis, the same housing crisis that we're seeing right across Australia right now. They're being affected by the same mandates. Now, mandates are a state issue. Release of land to build new housing, state issue, etc. So there's limited amounts that you can do on a lot of these things. But a lot of the challenges being faced are the same. And I can work for them to get the federal government out of their lives, just the same as I can work for any other state. Followed me since the Tassie pipeline to Victoria video. That was my third ever video. Could become a reality. No, I wouldn't be pinning my hopes on that. That's for sure. We will be giving out how to vote cards at polling booths, and we will of course be posting our how to votes online as well. Save this country, mate. Well, that's not something one person can do, I'm afraid, but that would take an act of God, and I mean that literally. That would take an act of God. Okay. So, I think I already answered that question earlier. Higher chance of winning the green card lottery than the Senate. Quite possibly. But you know what? I'm in the green card lottery and I'm in the Senate election. Thank you. If you aren't a brandy guy, you haven't tried enough brandies. Well, I'll tell you what, the Sullivan's Cove XO came very close to converting me, I can tell you that. Thank you, Darren. Can you send me an email? So I'm going to type in my email address here. One sec. This is trying to go out on me again. Can't have that. I'll type in my email address here. And if you are in Tassie and you can help, then please do. Topher at topherfield.net. send an email and say that you can volunteer to hand out how to vote cards, or you want to put a sign in your yard, or you want to organise something. If I can come down, or when I come down to Tassie again, you can organise something in your community, in your town, in your suburb, wherever you live in Tassie. I'd be very, very keen to work with you on all that sort of stuff. So, Karen as well, please do. Please send me an email. How much is the party throwing at your campaign? Unfortunately, the minor parties don't get money from the AEC. The big parties, if they get, I think it's more than 4% of the primary vote, they actually get money for every single vote. They literally make the taxpayers fund them so that they can try and convince the taxpayers to vote for them next time so that they can get more taxpayers' money to do it again. But they put a threshold on it, 4%. And that was specifically to try and make sure that the minor parties didn't get access to that cash. So the Liberal Democrats don't have budget. I'm having to fundraise, and we've had actually, I literally announced yesterday, and already come on, don't go out on me. This is one of the problems with talking and smoking. We actually had someone make a donation match guarantee up to $50,000. So any donations that come through, they're actually going to match up to $50,000. So every donation that comes through, and I'm just going to go ldp.org.au and I try and find the page again. There is a page where you can support the Tasmanian campaign, and okay, that's not it. I will dig that up for you before the end of the slow chat. And in fact, if you're on my email list, you would have received an email that has a fundraising link if you want to support. And like I said, we've got someone matching donations at the moment. So every time you donate, that gets matched, and effectively doubles the size of the donation. So just to give, because a lot of people don't understand how campaigns work, what do we need budget for? I'm going to put that down. That does not want to be smoked right now. So there's a bunch of things. So the how to vote cards themselves, they have to be printed. You've got to pay money for them. Core flutes and signs in people's yards, any sort of travel, that sort of stuff, getting on the road, getting around Tasmania, meeting people, going to community groups and meetings and that sort of stuff. But then there's also the potential, if the budget's there, there's the potential for then radio ads, for billboards, for these sorts of things to really start to grab a lot more attention. Now, at the moment, the media are trying to ignore me. They didn't show up to my campaign launch at all, not one, which is fine because I've had well over 30,000 views now on the video of the campaign launch. I am my own media channel, so thank you very much. I don't really need them the way that other people do. But if billboards start showing up, Liberal Democrats, etc., then all of a sudden the media are going to have to address it because people are going to be asking and saying, well, who's this? Why haven't I read about this? Who are these guys? And then the media's going to have to probably go into attack mode, which is their default position. Once they can no longer ignore you, they attack you, which is fine. I've been dealing with that for 12 years and I'll deal with it again. So things like radio ads and billboards would be fantastic because it would force the Tasmanian media to actually sit up and pay attention and to actually start having to talk about us, which even if they trash talk us, it's better than having them ignore us. So that's where I'd like to get to. And we need the budget to be able to do that. So I will dig up that link. And if you're on my mailing list, you've already got an email that's got that link in it. Both, Peter. Just whichever one's grabbed my eye. There's way more questions now that I can possibly answer. I think the questions I'm answering now were asked 45 minutes ago. So yeah, I'm a long way behind. No mandatory vaccinations. I agree. Yep. John Larder is the second candidate on the Liberal Democrats Senate ticket in New South Wales, and a good guy. Yep. Harriet, I feel you. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for saying hi. Yeah, and that's a challenge. It's a messaging challenge that we have. But as I said before, we're actually using the word liberal in its truest meaning, in its actual meaning. The Liberal Party have made an absolute disgrace of that word, and don't even get me started on American politics and the way they use the word liberal. So if Lambie can be an MP there, how much more you? Well, we'll see. We'll see. I agree. 1 to 2 freedom candidates can get in, and I think that's a possibility in every state. And Victoria, I think, is especially in play for 2, just because of what we've seen here, what's happened here. I think there could really be quite a big swing here. Queensland is another potential one, I think, because Pauline Hanson is running personally, not another person from her party, but she's running personally. So I think she'll do very, very well. She'll get a Senate seat in her own right. And then there's every possibility that Campbell Newman will get a Senate seat there as well for the Liberal Democrats, which would be really good. The more the better. Just show your speeches. Yeah, unfortunately, that wouldn't go down too well in Tassie because that's obviously very Victoria centric. So that's probably not the best strategy. Limerick is a gun. Yes, he is. There you go, Ruth. I will. I'll have to look you up when we get down to Tassie. Sounds like a nice area. Okay, I'm just going to. There's a few really long comments, and I'm just trying to skim through and just having to move on from. Jaron, I think I kind of answered this earlier to somebody else. Not a coalition, but we are working together because we recognize that fighting against each other, we're not going to achieve very much. So there are areas of agreement on policy, and there are definitely areas of disagreement on policy between us. And where we have overlap, where we agree, we are 100% working together. Yeah, Kerry. So what I need from you guys, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. Donations are great, but not everyone's in a position to. I mean, a lot of people are hurting right now, and I do not want anyone to be making donations unless you're absolutely in a position to do it. What you can be doing is sharing content online. And if you have friends or relatives in Tassie, reach out to them, let them know, direct them to the LDP page, direct them to my Facebook page, let them know what's going on. The more people that can volunteer to stand on polling booths and so forth in Tasmania, the better. And you can support the LDP in Victoria. So I would really encourage you, get on the LDP website, volunteer, go to the volunteer tab and volunteer for them to be able to stand on polling booths and hand out how to vote cards and do all that sort of stuff. You can help them right here. Nick, yes, absolutely. We will be issuing the instructions. Thank you, Peter. That's a very kind comment. I appreciate that. Okay, so this is a question that gets asked a lot, not so much recently, but I've had this question a lot over time. What's going on with this whole constitution thing with what Rod Culleton is doing? My honest answer is I don't know. I'm watching what's happening with him and the Privy Council, and I'm waiting. These are the people that can figure this stuff out. I'm not in a position to figure this stuff out. So I'm going to work with the system as it is now because that's the one we've got, and that's the one that's being used against us, and that's the one that's being used to make us bankrupt at the moment as a country, racking up absolutely unsustainable debt. And I will watch with interest the outcome, and I'll find out when they get to the bottom of it. Then I'll know. Leaving Vic, yeah, almost certainly. Regardless of what happens with this Senate run in Tasmania, I'll stay in Vic. If I'm not successful in the Senate run in Tassie, if I am successful in the Senate run in Tassie, I will gleefully move to Tassie straight away. Take the family down there. Absolutely, 100%. I'd love to. If I'm not successful, then I'll stay in Vic long enough to vote against Daniel Andrews in November, and then where the love is gone. Let's just put it that way. So somewhere near an airport is the answer to that one. DML says, I haven't seen a Lib Dems politician become corrupted. Well, thank you. And they are a very, very good party, and they tend to find very, very good candidates. But we always have to be humble enough to recognize that we're all human. And unless we, as the candidates, and then if we're elected as politicians, actively work to remain uncorrupted and to remain connected to our electorate and to the real world, then we're as susceptible as anyone else. So it's got to be a conscious choice. And I'm very, very aware of that. Um, What do I know about Tasmania? Been there a bunch of times, got family there, got a sister there, got cousins there, been there both on business and on pleasure. And I know that the challenges facing them are very, very similar to the challenges facing the rest of Australia. Cost of living, cost of housing, over-regulation, intergenerational debt. These are all things that the Liberal Democratic Party has policies to address. And the vast majority, or certainly all of the major parties, do not have policies that will address any of those problems. Keep holding slow chats as a senator. I would hope that I could, even if it's not necessarily weekly, even if it has to be dialed back a little bit. I would really hope that I could. And I do want to be kept honest. I do want to be challenged. If I get elected, I do not want to surround myself with yes men and yes women and people that just do as they're told. That is a recipe for disaster. We've seen that happen. Oh, it turns out the slow chats are a topic. David Lynn, what happens to the slow chat program? It might have to get dialed back a little bit, but I would love to keep it going in some form or other. I'm not going to blame God for anything. I'm a believer, but I'm not going to say that God is doing this or God is doing that. I've seen far too many people do that and speak fairly foolishly. All I'll say is that things have made a lot of sense so far. And I'm very, very comfortable with the decision to run. What that means in terms of my chances of winning, I'm not going to speculate, but I'm very comfortable with the decision to run, and I'm going to give it everything I've got. Not yet, but we're working on it. And anyone who would like to volunteer, please email me at topher@topherfield.net if you'd like to be a part of the boots on the ground team. Will we continue the Cigar Professor Friday lives? That'll be more challenging to justify if I get elected as a senator, but I would certainly hope to be on there as a special guest on a semi-regular basis. So for those that don't know, I have business partners and we import and we sell cigars. And so people often complain, oh, he's spending all this money on cigars. No, I'm not. Other cigar smokers in Australia are paying for my cigars. Thank you very much to those of you that are doing that for me. I do appreciate it. Okay. Interviewing pollies. Yeah, I could do slow chats interviewing other pollies. That could get spicy. That could be funny. Okay. Well, thank you, Denise. And I look, I am someone who is very critical of politicians, but I do try and give them the chance to explain themselves, and I do try to hear them out. Because I do recognize it is a lot more complicated in there than what it is looking in from the outside. Kylie, I believe with enough dollars, anyone can get bought out. Well, that might be true, but I've actually successfully resisted the temptation to get bought out for $1 million before. I won't retell the story, but for those of you that know my story about the Wilberforce Award, which was offered to me personally by Dick Smith, you'll know that. So I know for a fact that $1 million is not enough to buy me. There you go. Thank you, handsome muggle. If you haven't seen the the preferential voting with marbles videos, you need to do that. They're on my YouTube channel and they're on my Facebook page. Thank you, trolls, for feeding the algorithm. Really appreciate it. New shirt. I'm not that guy. Yeah. Sure, every state has its own kind of centric, we all have our rivalries against the other states, and Tasmania probably more so than most other states. I mean, maybe not Western Australia, but certainly more so than the eastern states. But I think the important thing to remember here is two things. Number one, they're facing the same challenges: the cost of living, intergenerational debt, cost of housing, etc. The complication of life, excessive red tape, a government in Canberra on the mainland telling them what to do. And in addition to that, as someone pointed out before, they don't really have candidates and politicians standing up and speaking out against the mandates. And to get a Senate seat, you only need about 7% of the vote. So if there's 7% of the people looking for someone who's going to say what they're thinking about mandates, then we just need to communicate with them. And that's where the budget comes in, to be able to run the campaign, to be able to reach those people. And at that point, you can actually achieve something at that point, hopefully. Ba-ba. Yeah, when you've been arrested and shot at for your beliefs, you won't be easy to corrupt. I certainly hope not. I'll be known as Mr. Marbles. Dear. Yeah. So this is the problem with politicians. We were talking about this before. How do you stay uncorrupted? And so often politicians that do get corrupted, they see it as being for the greater good. They justify it to themselves. Every man's way is right in his own eyes. And that's the danger. And that's what I need to be very aware of. And every politician ought to be being very aware of. Thank you for that comment. Lots and lots of great comments. Thank you, and too many for me to sort of read them all and put them up. Yeah, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man gets lynched instead of is king. Very clever. Yeah, too many politicians act on dodgy, quick advice. They're trying to do their job at a superficial level. Go with their gut. Go with their party. Get that done and get on the piss for the night. Yeah. Those other policies don't even know what a litre of milk is worth. Well, they don't know what a loaf of bread is worth. This is the problem. The bubble is comfortable, but we all have our own bubbles in our own life. We've all got our bubbles around us, but the Canberra bubble is a particularly diabolical one. Yes, if you pick the hill to die on, you may die, but it's your hill. So I was explaining this early on, Dan, or Dan the Man, which again, given your comment at the very outset, I assumed you were a troll, but I don't know. Anyway, I'll answer the question anyway. I might be wrong. The progression of how it happened was really, it made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense. Any seat in any state was not an option. But if I was going to run for a seat in any state, Tassie would be it, and Tassie is it. Yeah, look, there's a few restrictions I'd like to see put on politicians, but that's just my own sort of personal thing. And I think, honestly, people that have spent their entire life preparing for politics have no place in politics. You got to get out there in the real world. Denise, they already do. Are you not worried about how the media will sift through your life and misrepresent you, which they will? I've been called a Nazi. I've been called a right-wing nut job. I've been called a misogynist. I've been called a racist, which is hilarious. I'm actually more in favor of immigration than the Greens are. So compared to me, they're the racists. But apparently, if you believe the media, so it's, you sit there and go, well, they've already pulled all that stuff on me, and they'll do it again, no doubt. But there comes a point where you just go, oh yeah, that's just noise. It really is. And if you've been following me for a while, you would have heard me use that expression. It's just noise. And there's a power in that. It's just noise. Meh, whatever. 39. I'll be 40 in 4 days. So there you go. How can we help? I think I answered your question earlier, Jody. How can we help? But send an email to topher@topherfield.net if you're in Tassie and you can help with boots on the ground. Otherwise, help out by donating to the campaign. I sent the link in my email earlier today. And if you're not on my emails, you need to go to topherfield.net and sign up to the emails, to the mailing list there. No, that wouldn't disallow you. You've got to be found guilty, and there's got to be a decent prison sentence to disqualify you, is my understanding of it. Thank you, Hannah. Please do. Yes, Andrew, I have some awareness of what you're referring to there, and that is a problem. One of the things that I would love to be doing if I were to be elected would be to draw attention to the fact that the federal government have an obligation under the 2007 Water Act to institute a public, visible, searchable water trading database that shows who owns water and who has traded in water in the past. And they have refused to do that. It's now been 15 years since that legislation was passed. They've refused to do that, and I think there's a number of politicians that have something to hide. So me personally, I would definitely be trying to make that happen. Um, ba, 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 ba. Okay, so this is another great example of nuance and understanding the multiple layers to an issue. Speaking with a local LDP candidate, I've heard that LDP will stand against vaccine restrictions, well, mandates, as in vaccine mandates from the government. Yes, but they will not stand against the medical discrimination by business or the vax passports, as in entry to a specific location. What are my understanding and thoughts on this policy? And if true, what will you do about this? Okay, very simply, we believe in private property. If I own a pub, I should be able to set the rules of entry. Now, if I owned a pub and I was able to set the rules, you'd be allowed to smoke cigars in my pub, right? Because that's the rule that I would like to set for my pub. And then there would be some people who'd go, well, I don't want to go somewhere that's full of cigar smoke, so I'm not going to give you my money. I'm not going to be a patron of your pub because I don't like the rules that you made in your pub. I'm free to make the rules, and other people are free to say, you know what, I don't like those rules. I'm going to go somewhere with a different set of rules. That's really what this comes down to. We don't believe that the government should be setting rules that apply to everybody and take away the private property ownership rights of the people running the businesses or owning the house or whatever it may be. If you go to someone's house and they say you've got to take your shoes off, you can make a choice. You take your shoes off or you leave, or you violate their private property rights by walking in there with your shoes on anyway. Now, I get vaccines are a very different thing. You can't, you can put your shoes back on when you leave. You can't take a vaccine out, but you can choose not to go in. And because we believe in private property rights, we believe that the business owner, the whoever it is that owns that private property has the right to set the rules, and you have the right to not engage with them. What we don't believe is that the government has the right to set those rules, to indemnify people from liability for various, side effects, etc. All this sort of nonsense. We definitely are opposed to that. So understand there's two different layers here. There's what we believe the government is allowed to do, but then there's also what we believe individual private property owners are allowed to do with their own property. So that's where those two, the seemingly competing, why would you say this and not that? Well, it's because one is the government and the other is private property. That's where the difference comes from. We're vetting candidates at the moment, Catherine, and we're looking at getting some really good lower house candidates in Tasmania. And in fact, you can continue to apply to be a candidate for another, I think it's 24 hours. I think it closes at midnight tomorrow. And that's to give us enough time to fully vet people and then have our team completely assembled in time for when the election gets announced. And then we have to put in who all our candidates are no more than 10 days after that. So I believe by tomorrow, if you want to be a candidate, you have to have notified us and begun that process by midnight tomorrow. So if that's of interest, again, send it to me personally. I'm the Senate candidate there, and I'm obviously heavily involved in everything that's going on there. So Topher at topherfield.net. Let me know that you want to be a candidate. Give me a bit of a bio, a CV, whatever you've sort of got about yourself. Give me some idea of who you are if you would like to be a candidate over there. I think I've already answered that one now, Ethan. Like I said, I'm about an hour behind on the comments, so I think I've already got to that one. He wasn't the last politician with stogies. He's famous for his stogies, but he certainly wasn't the last one. Felicity, my understanding is that there's nothing that stops you from putting a sign in your yard, from putting things in letterboxes, from handing out how to vote cards, that sort of thing. So just because you can't personally vote doesn't stop you from being involved in other ways. All right, so I answered a similar question to this one earlier, Trent, where there's the question of what the government has the authority to do, and then there's the question of what I would personally choose for myself. So if you missed that, go back and have a listen to the rest a little bit later on. Catherine, I'm hoping to actually get right around Tassie between now and when the election is. And so, yes, I would hope so. Well, broadly speaking, I don't expect that to happen, Glenn. It's a good question. I've known John and a number of the other key people within the Liberal Democrats now for many years. I've spoken at conferences that they've organised. We've hung out. We've spoken on many different topics and many different issues. One of the things that I like about the Liberal Democrats is they are genuinely principles-based. They're not making up their mind issue by issue. Well, what do we think about this issue? Well, the question then is, okay, but hang on, what are the principles that underpin that issue? Okay, once we see what the principles are, it usually becomes very easy to see. And on an in principle level, the Liberal Democrats and I are very, very well aligned, with only a small number of exceptions that are already well known to both them and to me. And one of the things I like about the Liberal Democrats is they leave certain areas to the conscience of the candidate. Now, remember also, there are areas and there are issues that aren't going to come up for a federal senator. So there was a question a moment ago about abortion. That's not dealt with at a federal level. So the party position on that and my personal position on that are actually never going to come into the equation, because that's not something that gets dealt with at a federal level. And I cannot imagine a federal government wanting to touch that with a 40-foot pole. So that gets dealt with at a state level. So a lot of the potential differences that I might have with the Liberal Democrats are actually things that aren't going to get dealt with at that level, at the federal level anyway. So they'll never actually come up. So how would we deal with it? We would have some long and in-depth conversations, and then ultimately, as the elected member, it comes down to me to make a decision of how I'm going to vote on that. But I would make that decision. If I was going to be disagreeing with the party on any given thing, that would only be as a consequence of long, in-depth conversations and a great deal of back and forth of trying to understand where has this disagreement come from? What's the fundamental principle that we're not aligned on here? And I would expect in that process, we're probably going to be able to work out any differences anyway. What's happening with the court case? It's been adjourned until actually just after the election. I think 2 days after the election. James says, I've handed out how to vote cards for many a year. I've never followed one. Well, that's because you know enough about politics to make your own mind up. There are plenty of people who just want that how to vote card, because then they can just follow it and job done. So many a study has been done to actually determine, does handing out how to vote cards actually make a difference? And figures anywhere from sort of 1 to 2.5%, sometimes more, sometimes less. But generally speaking, having people there handing out how to vote cards seems to make about a 1 to 2.5% difference on any given polling booth, which when you're talking about trying to get 7% to get a Senate seat, 1 to 2.5% is a pretty substantial proportion of what you actually need. By Australian standards, Satan would probably run a state pretty well. I think Satan would find ways to screw things up even worse than Daniel Andrews. Maybe only by a little bit, but I think he'd find a way. Has the 10,000 people in Tassie watched Battleground Melbourne? Oh, hang on, you're selling them a bit short here. There's many hundreds of thousands of people in Tassie. But no, I mean, again, why would they? Okay, those that have connections to Victoria or a particular interest in the topic might. But they've gotten through COVID comparatively well off. I mean, the tourism industry was smashed, obviously, as it was Australia-wide. But in terms of their own lockdowns and their own experiences, I mean, there were protests against vaccine mandates and the border closures and things like that. But their police never acted the way the Victoria Police did. The protests were always quite small, but they were allowed to actually voice their political opinions and engage in political communication in a way that we weren't allowed to in Victoria. So I don't know how much interest there would be, to be quite honest. Agate Master says, you'd be surprised how many know you around the country. I'm in far north Queensland. Well, that's encouraging. Thank you. Yeah, Tony is dead right. People still think that voting for a minor party is a waste of time because the preferences will go to a major party. Please, please, please keep educating people on how preferential voting works. I will, but also I need you and everybody else to keep on educating people, keep on telling people, reminding people, talking to people. We've got to, this idea that, oh no, you don't talk about politics. That is terrible advice. We've got to talk about politics. I know it's boring. I know it sucks. And I'm not saying go out there and start fights. I'm just saying we've got to be talking about this stuff amongst our friendship groups and amongst our family. Catherine, can you send me an email, topher@topherfield.net? Because if you're interested, what I need are people on the ground willing to organize little events. As I travel around, I want to be able to go to a church hall, community hall, park, wherever it may be, and catch up with people. And I need people who are willing to kind of help to coordinate that and make that happen. So could you, Catherine, and anyone else interested in doing that, can you just send me an email, topher@topherfield.net? What sort of support do you need? Donations, definitely, so that I can fund things like printing the how to vote cards, printing core flutes, maybe if we get enough budget, putting up some banners, maybe doing some radio ads, these sorts of things. Very, very important. Very, very important. Especially, I said it before, but I'll say it again. If we can do radio ads and billboards, it's going to force the media in Tassie to start talking about it. They can't stay silent if there's a big billboard in Launceston, big billboard in Hobart. They can't keep ignoring the Liberal Democrats after that. So I'd love to have enough budget to be able to do that. And then also boots on the ground. So volunteers, if you're in Tassie, please send an email, topher@topherfield.net, and I'll put your name into a database, and I'll have someone contact you when we're coordinating everything. Once I know when I'm getting back to Tassie, we want to coordinate events, groups of people that I can catch up with, and then obviously come polling day, we want people handing out how to vote cards and all that sort of stuff. So that's really important. So topher@topherfield.net. I agree. Alex Antic and Jared Rennick are two very, very good politicians, and I would love to coax them over to the LDP. That's not an official position, by the way. It's just my personal opinion, but I'd love to be able to get them over to join the LDP. This is the ideal outcome, DML. If we can get to the point where neither major party in the lower house gets a majority, then that would be amazing. Now, understand, I'm running in the upper house in the Senate. The lower house is the one that forms government. Getting seats in the lower house is a lot more difficult. I did a whole thing on Marbles, how to vote preferences thing on how it can happen, but it is a lot more difficult. Getting Senate seats is comparatively easy. It's not easy, but it's comparatively easy, given that you only end up needing about 7-8% to pick up that last Senate seat in any of the Australian states. Not sure what you're referring to, but I'm actually quite keen on Tassie and would be very happy to move there. Been there a bunch of times. Loved it every single time. Would you be able to enter Parliament as a pureblood, or will they try and lock you out? Don't know. And if they try and lock me out, then they'll have hell to pay. I would raise hell over that. That would be, look, that'd be great publicity, to be honest. Running in the federal election, Jimmy, and as a federal senator for Tasmania. I don't remember the WikiLeaks party ever running in the Senate. That might have been before I was paying attention, or it might have been one of the elections that I just didn't pay attention to. So, yeah, a lot of people agreeing that Melbourne does not feel like home. Okay, Guy, I get a lot of this sort of stuff. Okay, you are partaking in a fraudulent, corrupt system. Great. What's your plan? You got one? Do you have a mechanism for change that can actually fix the things that you believe are wrong, that actually has a better than 10% probability of working in my lifetime without just causing civil war and bloodshed and revolution? If you've got one of those, send me an email. If you don't, maybe join the people that are actually trying to work with what we've got. All right? We don't choose the hand we get dealt. We just choose how we play it. Okay, so One Nation put out a how to vote video claiming there are 12 Senate seats per state. That is absolutely correct. However, the term of a senator is 6 years, but there's an election approximately every 3-ish years. So every single election, actually only half the Senate is up for re-election. So that's why I talk about there being 6 seats. That's because that's how many are being elected in any given election in any given state. But actually there are 12 senators per state. And there is a thing called a double dissolution election where all 12 are up for re-election at the same time. It happens from time to time. One happened not that long ago. However, One Nation are correct. There are 12 seats. I'm also correct. There are 6 up for grabs at this election. Yes, Melbourne and Victoria are not the same. Yes, and there are a further 2 Senate seats for each territory in the upper house. Lots of good comments, but people, I'm now only just now, to give you some idea of how far behind I am, I'm only just now getting to people's comments about the fact that you could hear me just fine. So that, how long ago was that I had the internet connectivity issues? So I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through them all. Okay, good question. Could you outline why fence-sitting voters should vote for Liberal Democrats versus other freedom parties? Very simple, because the Liberal Democrats are the only in-principle freedom party, and we apply that principle to all areas. There are other parties that have really good policies on, for example, opposing the vaccine mandates, wanting to see people allowed to protest and not having these crackdowns on protest, no more lockdowns, etc. They've got really good policies in those areas. but they aren't necessarily freedom parties when it comes to economic policy and free trade, or they may not be freedom parties when it comes to other areas. The Liberal Democrats apply the principles of freedom to absolutely every single area. That is our underlying principle. That is our guiding principle. Less government, more freedom in every single area. So that's what sets us apart from what I refer to as the other freedom-friendly minor parties. But when I say that, what I mean is they're good when it comes to COVID stuff, and they're good when it comes to speech, freedom of speech, freedom of protest. And for the purposes of this election, such is the awful state of Australian politics. If they're good on those two issues, then I'm including them in this basket of what I'm calling the freedom-friendly minor parties. So just to give you an example, I spent 3 days with Senator Malcolm Roberts. We explored the Murray-Darling Basin. He was on a fact-finding mission. I came away deeply impressed by him, deeply impressed. We need more politicians like him. But I strongly, fundamentally disagree with him on a significant range of policy areas. So, for example, one of the ones that we've discussed and has been out in public, I'm not giving up any confidence here, is the issue that they want to see multinationals paying what they would classify as their fair share of tax. And they were looking at mechanisms by which they could do that, adding taxes on to the multinationals. I would look at that and say, well, hang on, we should have an even playing field. I don't want the government picking favorites and treating people differently. But let's actually bring down everyone else's tax. If multinationals are getting away with paying hardly any tax, let's bring down everybody else's tax so that it's a level playing field rather than trying to find ways of adding on. So they're not necessarily an in principle low tax, small government, more freedom party. They are good in certain areas, and there are other areas where I have disagreements with them. So that would be my outline on that. James, you're almost right, but not quite. So Tasmania has a completely different hydrological system to the mainland. Water scarcity is not a thing. That's not quite correct. Tasmania does have droughts, particularly on the east coast and in the Central Highlands, which is where most of their agriculture is. And that's because a lot of their weather comes off Antarctica and it actually hits the mountains in the west, the wilderness in the west. And you can get instances where the west and the northwest are getting enormous amounts of rain. But by the time that weather system reaches the highlands, it's actually dumped all of its water and they can get very little rain across. And it was only it'd be 10 years ago, 12 years ago, they've had droughts. They do have droughts. But the west coast typically does not have droughts. And the northwest, which is where that water, sending water to the mainland, that's my third ever video that James is referring to, he's referring to me back when I was young and skinny. That's coming from a part of Tassie that really, you're quite right, doesn't have water shortage issues on that coast. But that's not to say they don't have water shortage issues. And actually in that video, I talk about that. And the money that could be raised by selling water to the mainland would be enough to then actually improve their own water infrastructure and have irrigation districts opened up. But anyway, now I'm going right back. 11 years, I think. Yeah, wow, that's a long time ago. Yep, there's lots of debate about what a better word would be. I'll let other people have that debate. Yeah, he's just throwing money around now, isn't he? It's just absolutely throwing money around and just buying votes. Like, it's so blatant. It's so blatant. Daniel's offering to show me how to fish. Yes, this is a good point. People talking about the word liberal. I've talked about the fact that the word liberal, that we're actually using it in the way that it in its actual meaning. If you go to classical liberalism on Wikipedia, it's right there. And you can learn about the origin of the term and how the Liberal Party have completely abused the word. Peter, sorry to hear about that. Camp Creek Hill. It's a state issue. There you go. I'm pretty sure that was the reaction you were looking for. Okay, so Adam, 2 years is not very long. Sorry, isn't. I was in New South Wales. I did I talked there at a school, a really interesting sort of new school model, not involving government money at all. And afterwards, someone said to me, "Oh, when is this going to be over? When are the mandates going to be ended? I don't know how much longer I can hold out. Like, we've been This has been, I haven't worked in, I think it was 3 months was what he said. And that's an awful situation. And I don't mean to belittle that at all, but I said to him, I'm from Victoria. There are people down here that haven't worked in well over a year. There are people that whose working and ability to earn income was smashed in March of 2020 and they never got it back. Here's the thing with wanting to put a timeline, with wanting to say, oh, no, things have to happen fast. I used to teach salsa dancing. Hard to believe, given that I'm now a fat bastard. But I used to be young and hip and skinny and cool, and I used to teach salsa dancing. And I was just teaching beginners. I was never teaching advanced students, but I'd teach beginners. And so they'd start out dancing, and they're having lots of fun. And they'd come to me after a month or two, and they'd say, oh, how long have you been dancing? And obviously what they're thinking is, how long until I can be as good as you are? And I would say, oh, I've been dancing for about 3 years. And their face would kind of fall. And I'd be like, oh, really? 3 whole years? And it happened enough times that it bothered me. And I began to think, okay, what's going on here? And so I tried something, and some poor person got the shock of their life because they asked me the same question. They said, oh, how long have you been dancing? I said, about 3 years. And I watched their face change. And I said, can I ask you a question? Sure. Do you plan to be dead in 3 years' time? Kind of, what? Do you plan to be dead in 3 years' time? Simple question. No, not planning on being dead in 3 years' time. Cool. Okay. So in 3 years' time, do you want to be alive and able to dance like I can? Or do you want to be alive and still be dancing at the level that you're at right now? Right? Because if you don't plan to be dead, the only decision that you have left is, are you going to put the work in and learn how to dance? And in 3 years' time, you'll be able to. Or are you going to not? And in 3 years' time, you'll feel the same way as you do right now. So, Adam, sorry, 2 years is not a long time of fighting this stuff. I've been a political commentator for 12 years. There are people who've been involved in politics and trying to change the world for 80 years. And they win some and they lose some, and you got to take the lumps with the good. The reality is this is a fight that is going to keep going for as long as you and I are alive, and it's going to keep going till long after we are dead. We enjoy the life that we enjoy because people long dead before we were born fought for those freedoms that we inherited. It's our turn to fight for the same freedoms to pass on to our kids so that people that we will never meet, who will be born 100 years after we die, will benefit from what we did while we were alive. This is not a sprint. This is a lifelong calling. This is a responsibility that each of us have. And whether I'm involved in politics, whether I'm commentating on politics, whether I'm in Australia or whether I'm in the Caribbean, I will be continuing to be involved in this fight. And I hope that you'll join me. Yeah, pretty much, Darren. I mean, we will not support, the Liberal Democrats will not vote for an increase in taxes or an increase in the size of government and the power of government. We just won't. On principle, it's already too big. Taxes are already too high. They're already wasting the power and wasting the money that we give them. Why would we support them getting any more? So absolutely. And you're dead right. The Liberal Democratic Party do not fit into the left-right paradigm. We did talk about that a little bit earlier. Do not fit into the left-right paradigm. Very well aware, Kathy. But honestly, what's really interesting, right? That's very true of a lot of the Tasmanians who would never vote for someone like me anyway, even if I was Tasmanian. Right? That's very true of a lot of the Tasmanians who have government jobs or various things like that. It doesn't seem to me to be true of the sorts of people that are concerned about things like intergenerational debt, that are concerned about inflation, that are concerned about the kinds of things that I've been talking about now for years and years and years, don't seem to fit into that category so much. Well, yes, Heather. Another party with enough votes can actually beat Liberal or Labor. Will that happen this election? No. But could it happen in time? Yes. The Liberal Party is only about 70 years old. They came from a standing start 70 years ago, and now we can't imagine politics without them. Well, we can have politics without them. Most countries, the majority of European countries, don't have a duopoly the way that we do. They always have minority governments where no one party actually holds a majority. And that's normal over there, and we can make that normal here. No problem. So, would you guys, I assume the LDP, be interested in bringing in a voters' veto type system? We haven't looked at that, but one of the things that is one of the 10 policies that we're putting forward as part of the Freedom Manifesto is what's called recall elections. We see it particularly in the US system, although there are other places that do it as well, where basically, if there is enough popular support, the public can actually recall a politician and force an election, even though it might not be the end of the term yet. So instead of the politicians deciding when they are going to go up for re-election, the people can actually demand a re-election. So it's called recall elections, and it's one of the things we would definitely like to bring in. No, Russ, I've always said I don't want to get into politics. Not that I never would. And the truth is I still don't really want to. But I think I'm doing the right thing. The truth is, I probably wouldn't be aiming to get the Greens' preferences. However, there is actually more overlap between me and the Greens than most people realize. So, the Greens, for example, believe in significant amounts of personal liberty and personal freedom in, for example, marijuana, other things like that. They are better than other parties when it comes to allowing people to move around. Now, they focus on refugees. I would like to see that opened up to anyone that wants to come here. So there's actually more overlap than you might realize. And this again comes down to that triangle. This isn't left versus right. The Greens aren't some extreme thing over here, and the Liberal Democrats some extreme thing over here. The Greens are a pretty extreme thing over here. They are a big government party. They love big taxing, lots of welfare, lots of intervention by the government. So they are a big government party. We're a freedom party, but we do have some overlap because the Greens do believe in freedom in a few areas. So there is some overlap there, and we might get a few, but it's not something that I'd be particularly aiming to get. Yeah, definitely. I will continue speaking, and I will. This would simply become my Facebook page would simply become the place where I continue to put content. It's just the type of content would change according to a change in role. Um, Trevor, we've already got really good people running in Victoria. David Limbrick, chief among them. He's the lead Senate candidate here in Victoria, and I would love to see him in Canberra. That would be amazing. So, no need for me to do that in Victoria, mate. Chalk, welcome to Tassie. We're so pleased to hear your announcement yesterday to run for the Senate. So over the mandates and the political bullshit. Yeah. Fear controls the masses. What made you decide Plan B in Tassie rather than go overseas? Well, it's a diversion. We'll see. We'll see. If I get elected, then absolutely, I'm happy to settle in Tassie. But if I don't get elected, then like I said earlier, I'm going to stay in Victoria long enough to vote against Daniel Andrews in November, and then we'll make our choices there. Okay. All right. Well, a lot of comments, and I don't think I'm just going to start scrolling fast because I think where am I up to? The comments I'm reading now are from 9:30. Yeah, so it's still from 35 minutes ago. So, guys, I'm going to have to get some sleep pretty soon. It's been a long. We spent a month on the road traveling around southeastern mainland Australia, and then we spent a couple of days in Tassie, and I've obviously got other work commitments and business commitments and other things as well. So it's been a long little while. An exciting day yesterday with the announcement. I'm really grateful, everyone, for you. For those that made it and for those that watched the actual speech that I gave, the video announcing that has had over 30,000 views on it. So thank you to everyone that shared that and helped that to get around. Stay tuned in because there are a lot more exciting things coming. So if you can help by supporting in terms of financially, please do. If you can't, if you shouldn't, because of your own circumstances, then please don't. You'll find the link to donate in the email that I would have sent you if you're on my email list. You'll find that there. If you can be boots on the ground in Tassie, please send an email, topher@topherfield.net. I'll pass it on to my team. They're doing all the scheduling, and we would love to have people handing out how to vote cards, putting signs in front yards, doing all that stuff to be able to help us make this campaign really, really successful. And if we get the budget, then we would love to do some radio ads, some billboards, things like that are going to just force the mainstream media over there to have to talk about us. They won't say nice things, that's to be expected, but we can at least force them to have to talk about us, and that's going to be good, excuse me, in terms of raising awareness and actually just getting people to be aware that we even exist. So that's where things are at. So I hope I've answered lots of your questions. I'm sorry, it just was not physically possible to get to all of the comments. Thank you, Sir Nigel. I appreciate that. So yeah, looking forward to this. This is going to be a fun couple of months. I'm going to give it absolutely everything that I've got. Like I said, in the end, it's not up to me whether I win. That's up to the people of Tasmania. I'm going to do everything that I can to get the attention to the party, and to get the word out there that there is actually an option that stands for freedom, that stands against the mandates, etc., and try and attract those Tasmanians that want that and want that voice to represent them, and hopefully we can make that work. If it doesn't, at an absolute minimum, I want to leave the Liberal Democrats in a much better position where come the next election, whether it's the next state election in Tassie or the next federal election, they're in a much stronger position. They've got a bigger support base, more people on the ground, etc. And for me personally, like I said, if we're not successful in this election, then I'm going to stay in Victoria because I want to vote against Daniel Andrews. I want my vote to count in that election. And just hoping that Victoria is smart enough to give him the boot come November, but we'll have to wait and see. There is a federal election to get through first, and then we'll talk about the Victorian state election after that. So thanks, guys. Thank you for joining me. Still, 280 odd people staying right to the end. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you for doing that and sticking around. Please pass this on. Please share this. Please comment on this. Tag people that you think need to see this, and contact me, Topher@topherfield.net, if you would like to help in some way. Thanks, guys.